Thank you for attending this session. This is the session for Inclusivity in Disaster Management. A mixed method geographer by training who is research focused on Canadian UNESCO Biosphere Reserves, Charmeline Mendes-Millard has worked for several interdisciplinary research centers focusing on advancing community well-being and social justice through community partnerships, program evaluations, and learning opportunities. At Laurier, she ran the Program Evaluation Certificate and Summer Institute of Research Methods and developed an applied research agenda on equitable approaches to evaluation. At We All Count, founded by Heather Cruz to promote data equity, Charmeline coached not-for-profits on how to collect and store social identity data and on other ways to think of and embed equity in data projects. Charmeline is passionate about the not-for-profit sector and building community and is currently the co-chair of the International Cultural Research Network and on the board for REAP Green Solutions after having been one of the staff who developed the community-engaged pilot RAIN stormwater management program in Kitchener-Waterloo. Please join me in welcoming Charmeline.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us for this last session before lunch on day 2. I want to thank the organizers and the volunteers and everyone who's made our days so welcoming and nourishing. So just a really gratitude to them, and also my gratitude to the Mississaugas, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe, whose territories we're on in this dish with one spoon territory. So today we're going to be talking about inclusivity in disaster management, specifically focusing on what can be done so that insurance coverage as part of a disaster response is equitable for Indigenous communities. And when I say Indigenous communities, I mean First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. A step toward equity is inclusion of equity denied and equity deserving communities. For those of you who attended last year's Insurance and Indigenous Communities session, you'll recall that many Indigenous households and businesses are not protected by insurance. This is the reality. Even though insurers, you want more policyholders, you want to be able to cover your losses, and people want products that can work for them and what they care about. In this case, this means not only houses, homes, personal possessions, but also community assets like cultural hunting camps. Ultimately, insurance is all about calculating and reducing risk. That's why we're all here. And so how can we work together to understand risks faced by disproportionately impacted populations, such as First Nations, reduce the risk of damages, and reduce costs and impacts on communities so that services are actually equitable? Our panel today is a continuation of what I hope are ongoing conversations to discuss what the problems are and what solutions we can try so that everyone is cared for and cared about. We're privileged to hear from 2 speakers with a wealth of knowledge and experience to share. First is Tyrone McNeil, President and Tribal Chief of the Stolo Tribal Council and Chair of the Emergency Planning Secretariat, or EPS. EPS is supporting BC mainland Coast Salish communities in developing a comprehensive climate resiliency strategy named Helix Skaka that draws on the Sendai Framework, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, National Adaptation Strategy, case law, nature-based solutions, and Coast Salish worldviews to be proactive in establishing long-term resilience for their 31 communities. It's a great model for regional governance. Tyrone has extensive experience in collaborating with First Nations across Turtle Island and in developing agreements and partnerships with government. He holds many leadership positions, including as Special Advisor to the First Nations Leadership Council on Emergency Management, and last week was named one of Vancouver Magazine's Power 50 for fighting to ensure emergency services work with First Nations in planning for and responding to disasters. Congratulations, and thank you for traveling so far to be with us today. Second, we have Kellyanne Meloche from the Iroquois Mohawk Nation of Ganawake. No, Ganawake.
You got it.
Ganawake, yes, sorry, who is the Senior Manager of Disaster Risk Management at Canadian Red Cross National Operations. With 30 years of experience within public safety management and coordination, Kellyanne's work has included emergency management, disaster response, fire management, emergency medical services, and full-scale emergency exercises across Turtle Island. Welcome, Kellyanne, and thank you for traveling so far.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so how this is going to go is I'll ask the panelists a few questions about risk and resilience from a First Nations perspective, Indigenous perspective, recognizing that there is no one perspective and that all communities are homogenous. Then we're going to think about some solutions and things for you to take away as ways forward, and we'll have questions from the audience. So as you listen to them, I hope that you will think about what could be tried, what are the barriers you see, and how we can overcome those barriers, because these are really important conversations. So we'll start with the context, and Tyrone, I'll ask you. So what does risk mean to you and to a First Nations community, and how do you think risk is perceived differently from an insurance perspective?
As I start, Lao CMLCIA, Cecily Schools, which Lala CMLCIA, so Sithala, Amux, Mystir, the Mississaugas, Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, Mystir, Equisida, Hahatamach. As I begin, the first thing you might have noticed, I think I'm the only one in the room coughing. Over Christmas time in the Fraser Valley, Vancouver area, one of the flus came through, and a whole bunch of us just have this irritating little cough, and it's just lingering, it's not going away. Not contagious, but so irritating. I'll do my best to contain that here in the presentation. Thank the organizers for inviting me back again. There's so much knowledge here, so many brilliant people here. It's a real opportunity for people like me to continue learning. And when we're talking about risk, and from an insurance perspective, or a legal perspective, or a human right perspective, I want to raise with you 3 deficit situations that we're in that you should be aware of. The most significant one is a thing called the Indian Act, which makes us so dependent on the federal government for all kinds of services and supports. In my lifetime as a child, my community couldn't make a decision without a federal bureaucrat signing off on what the decision is. In my lifetime, we couldn't gather more than 12 people at a time other than at a funeral. And in my lifetime, we couldn't vote federally. So these are recent, right? It's not 10 generations ago, it's recent, and it's still lingering with us yet today. Another is our relation with the Crown itself, which directly impacts you as insurers, because the whole fabric of Canada is made up on terra nullius. When all the Europeans got here, the doctrine of discovery informed them that the land is empty. There's no human beings living on the land. And that's been playing out in the courts for a number of years. And it affects you because this year is the 10th anniversary of the Supreme Court of Canada. In Chilcotin, where the Supreme Court ruled that we, as title holders, have title relation to our entire traditional territory. And we don't have to go to court to prove it. And along with title, there's an economic benefit with title, because it's court decisions like that allow us to start moving away from the Indian Act, to be self-dependent, self-sufficient, to occupy that jurisdictional decision-making space that on paper says we have, and in reality we don't. And the third deficit area is the very fabric of Canada is based on indifference, bias, and racism to us broadly as Indigenous peoples, and that plays out in emergency management. And I can only speak to BC First Nations broadly. I'm involved province-wide in a number of initiatives, including emergency management. And in BC, we have a bilateral agreement between British Columbia and Canada that says the province, through what is now the Ministry of Emergency Management, Climate and Resilience, is responsible for building our capacity, for ensuring all of our communities have emergency management plans, recovery plans, ESS plans, all those kind of good things, and that we have adequate resource. And the kicker there is that whatever the province spends on us, annually the province gives a bill to Indigenous Services Canada, and ISC pays the bill. So it's not even provincial funding. Yet only a quarter of our communities have emergency management plans. We only recently started hiring emergency program coordinators in our communities. So can you imagine being in our position where November 2021 comes along, or the heat dome of 2021 comes along, and the provincial government, as a crown, looks at us as First Nations and says, you've got jurisdiction to do whatever you want, do it. We don't have capacity, we don't have funding, we don't have experience. So during a state of emergency, we're left on our own. So, which is problematic because a lot of our communities do have different measures of insurance, but not all. So if you look at it from your investment perspective or from our protection and save us, recover perspective, it's challenging and problematic. But we are transitioning out of those deficit areas where we're calling racism for what it is at each and every level that we can. We're occupying spaces like we never have before. In my case, it's a pleasure to be lead, bringing not only 31 of our communities, my relative communities, together in a common strategy that is based on Sendai, it's based on Chilcotin. Last year, there's a Supreme Court decision around Yahi, around cumulative impacts. And some of you may have heard the recent changes within BC, where now the provincial government's going to be working with us to amend the Lands Act to give us shared decision-making with local governments in British Columbia. That's going to be significant here. Because remember, Chilcotin speaks to our tidal lands, our entire traditional territory. Now we'd have shared decision-making with local governments because we'll transition from local governments making all kinds of decisions on our tidal lands, and we're not even at the table. Nor do we benefit from them because historically, local governments would have put a dike in such a case that our reserve are on the river side of the dike and the town is on the safe side of the dike. So that's going to de-risk things. It's going to be a learning and education opportunity for everybody, not only us, because we're still young in this ability to express our authority, to express our rights. And I'm sure we're going to be a little bit slow. We're going to be a little bit uncomfortable. But over time, we'll gain that experience like local governments do, who tend to make decisions quite quickly in their governance style. But it's about recognizing our rights in such a way that our communities are safer, our communities have the ability to grow our own economies, to be self-sufficient, to do things like pay for adequate insurance coverage, to be and hold ourselves and everybody else accountable, responsible for expectations in all things emergency management, including recovery. And it's an opportunity, and maybe I'll end here for now, Charmaline. It's an opportunity for us to express who we are in terms of our identity, our relation to the land, to governments of all sorts, regulators of all sorts, in a sense that looks at the land differently, that values the land and resources differently. And you're going to play a role in that over time, especially for me in the Fraser Valley. Right now, we have local governments trying to develop immediately alongside the Fraser River, the highest risk flood areas in the entire lower Fraser, and they're trying to develop there. And in some cases, they're using federal funding to do that development, and the federal government Infrastructure Canada comes to me and asks me, why are these towns building right next to the Fraser like that? They're in the flood zone. They're going to get wet. And my question back to them is, why are you funding them? Doesn't make sense. Say no. And same for you as insurers. I really like your risk modeling you're doing. That's in par with how we see and value risk itself. And at some point, you as insurers are going to have to start guiding development away from those highest risk flood areas by saying no to coverage. And you'd be like-minded with us in that, because we want to promote resilience. We want to promote nature-based solutions for those long-term strategies and actions that we'll all benefit from. I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Kellyanne.
Yeah, how do I follow that up, right? Sego za wagwego, degari wan hawa yajats. Nyawago and unquest. So, hi everyone. My traditional name is Degari Wanhawi, which means she comes with a message. And I find that very ironic. My grandmother gave me that name when I was born. And I do go talking a lot across Turtle Island in like all of North America. And it really is about connecting people and sharing those messages. So I always wondered, did she foresee the future or did she curse me? I really think it was a curse. But thank you. I did acknowledge and give thanks to the lands here which we are in, but also thank you to you, Ne'unkwesung, all of the people, because you have a choice to be here and you're here listening. So thank you very much. One of the things when we talk about risk and how do I view risk or how do we view risk, one of the biggest ones right now I find is we're not talking to each other. And I hate the term silo as much as I hate the term resilience for myself, but we are all working, and we all have the same goal in mind. It is protection, it is mitigation, it is reducing the loss of life, reducing the loss of property, and then also the effects on the environment and long-term health. Last week I was asked about climate change and when do we start or stop talking about it? I'm like, we're done talking about climate change. We really are. If you don't know about it by now, then you need to talk to somebody else. But what we need to do now is action. So with risk comes that not talking to our neighbor. And we really need to talk to each other, work together. You mentioned nature-based solutions. That's the best way. If we want to start mitigating risk, let's help Mother Nature to protect itself and limit those damages with nature. It just, if we've got a flood-prone area, even in my grandfather's yard, he had one part that flooded all the time. He said, we have to plant a willow tree, get the willow trees in there. The great willow will suck all that water up, and it definitely did. It never flooded again. So there's certain things like that where if we talk and have that conversation with each other, and it can go as far as the region that you're working in or that your office is in or the company is in, take a look at the nations that are there in that region and connect with them. Knock on the door and say, how can we work together? And it is really difficult, and I'm so glad that Chief McNeil is here because he can speak to the political aspects of that. And for me, it is really about the operational administrative part where there are barriers and hoops that we have to jump in order to get something. Where we had limited resources for coordinators, yes, the communities got funding for emergency coordinators, but that might have been $15,000 to $20,000, whereas the normal coordinator's rate is, 50 or more. And so that funding ends up going to somebody that's already working in a position of public safety, i.e. the fire chief or someone else that's in public safety in the community. So they're wearing multiple hats and they can't, emergency management, coordination, training, exercise, plan development, working with partners, that's a full-time job, and we know that. So it really is about how can we communicate, connect, and talk with those that are in your region. Because you will, when we work together and communicate, we're going to come up with the best solutions because our goal is the same, and that is prevent losses.
Thank you so much. So let's talk a bit more about how you view changing risk during states of climate crisis and what it is that you feel is more of the missing pieces for what people should understand about the risks and the disproportionate impacts that your communities face.
Starting with the flood, the national risk profile that came out late last year stated that about 10% of Canadians are living in high-risk flood areas, and 90% of First Nations are living in high-risk flood areas. It goes back to that Indian Act, right? Indian Act around the reserve creation, which hasn't adapted to time. And when those reserves were created, in my case, they're all immediately next to the Fraser, because the Fraser was our economy, it was our fridge, it was our food source, it was our spirituality. But now, nearly 200 years later, we can't rely on the Fraser for salmon anymore, because the mismanagement of the Department of Fisheries Oceans is extirpating or creating some stocks that actually go extinct. So it's not that food source anymore, but the reserves are there. And it's about how it is that we take advantage of existing rights, whether it be the Declaration, whether it be the Inherent Rights Policy, existing rules of Canada to allow us to get out of those high-risk flood areas, but retain our relation to those Section 9124 lands. Because it's important that we're at a higher level of control of them, as opposed to Crown lands or fee simple lands. It doesn't recognize who we are as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit across the country. And then related to that is the ability for us to leverage those lands into a better economy. When we have an economy, we can do all kinds of good things, right? We could build better houses. The housing program put on by the federal government started through the Indian Act and went through the CMHC, promotes low quality construction. My community is in a good position where when we graduated out of school in the 70s, we started building our own houses. I built over 200 houses in my community. I plumbed all 200 of those houses, and I roofed most of them, and I finished the concrete in a lot of them, because we're doing it ourselves, right? And because we had that capacity and experience at the journeyman level, we had a better understanding what quality is. So we could actually take the funding and build quality houses, quality schools, quality band administration, health facilities, because we had that capacity ourselves in that generation. We don't have it in this generation, but we want to rebuild it. So recognizing that, you as insurers are going to be looking down at us because of low quality construction, poor community planning, negligible capacity. But we have vision, right? We'd like to see where we want our kids and our grandkids to be. But recognize that deficiency has been imposed upon us. We've been forced to be reliant on federal and provincial programs and services. We don't want that. We want to be self-sufficient. We want high standards of quality of living, that state of healthiness and happiness. In order to do that, we need more control of it. So we need more support, and we have heard from insurers over the years that the quality of housing on reserve has to improve. And then the federal government throws a few million at it and hopes it goes away. It doesn't go away. We need continued pressure on those that we have forced to rely on. Until we build our own economies, we are reliant on the federal support to build houses, to build band offices, health centers, and whatnot. But we need to look at the end result of it and build the budget backwards. Because too often, I might need a new school in my community. I price it out at $7.5 to $8 million. The feds come in and look at it. Well, you try to do that, but here's $5 million. And we don't have an economy for that $3 million difference, right? So we either have to downscale the size, the footprint of the school, or lower the quality in certain cases. So we need high building code standards, high an understanding, appreciation of the federal government that when high quality standards are maintained in construction, the long-term goals are met more easily. That we're not replacing that infrastructure as regularly. We're making them a little bit more fireproof, a little bit more flood-proof, a little bit more wind-proof, a little bit more hail-proof. Because you as insurers, you get it better. I don't want to ramble, Charmaline, but I appreciated in November 2021 when Minister Blair released 15% of the DFAA program for a Build Back Better component, which is great, right? Did nothing for us in BC because BC doesn't have a Build Back Better policy. So we got hundreds of millions of dollars here coming from Ottawa that we could have built back better, but because BC didn't have the policy, we couldn't. So the recovery stage is all to replace what it was before the event. So let's get beyond that. And you as insurers, you got some voice, you got some weight. Let's stay united on that. And I think if you insurers partner with us with a deeper understanding of risk that right now most governments don't get, then we become a larger force, right? And we look for other allies to come with us. Look at risk differently, respond to risk differently, and really move the mindsets of bureaucrats and that I deal with provincially and federally, that they're loud and proud that the first priority of emergency is mitigation. Gee, I tell you, I just want to go up there and cuff them and tell them to sit down. Both British Columbia and Canada have signed on to Sendai. First priority of Sendai is understanding the risk. You get it, you got skin in the game. But government's got skin in the game too, but they don't get it. So we have to keep educating all orders of government on our local understanding of risk, not a pan-national understanding. We do have to do some national modeling, absolutely. But in the end, it's place-based, right? Well, what is the risk model for my community in the Upper Fraser Valley? What is the risk model for the entire Fraser Valley? And how do we respond to that in a resilient, nature-based priority solution?
Not rambling at all. Partnerships to understand the local context. Thank you. Kellyanne, I think you have more to share about the context too of risk and the disproportionate impacts on people, especially when it comes to insurance, and what kinds of things you see are gaps that could be filled. So for instance, with hunting camps, for example.
Yeah, we know that our communities are disproportionately impacted and burdened with, like, especially during disasters. Some of our homes are already, not built to code, unfortunately, but a lot of our communities also don't have the infrastructure that's in there to protect those homes. But why? It goes back again to funding, and then because we don't have the ability to do it ourselves within our communities. Where do we have more work to do? Certainly, because First Nation communities are considered reserves, and we call it our home, we call it our territory. It's federal lands. Is that an issue for insurances to insure something that's on federal lands? And what does that mean to you? What does that mean to your policies? And our traditional camps, or our hunting camps, is where we get our winter sustenance. I are very, very proud to say that, my son-in-law was able to go and get a moose this past season, and my freezer is full of moose. And, we prefer moose and deer because, we find it's healthier for us and much better. But before I'm getting hungry before lunch and talking about moose meat, I'll stop. And so it is certainly a place where we can have one hunting camp that would probably supply 5 to 10 families that would use that one location and then hunt from there to bring it back to families for sustenance for the winter. Those camps are not insured or insurable. And I'm wondering, if we called it a chalet, would it be insurable? Because it's the same thing. It's in the north. It probably doesn't have electricity, or maybe some chalets do, obviously. But if there's a well, or it's near a lake or a pond or whatever, a river, it's our hunting camps. So if we say that, well, it's Kellyanne's chalet.
Chalet and spa, I feel.
Spa? Okay. Well, I don't know about a spa, because there's a lot of work when you go there, so for sure. But yeah, so I think within, how can we look at having the ability to ensure those that provide for those families. The wildfires majorly affected those hunting camps this past season, and there's a lot of them that are now gone. So if you look at one camp affecting 10 families and their sustenance for the winter, that's a lot. Again, more disparities, it just kind of adds on.
And I think you were also mentioning, so your community is by Montreal, so there is insurance, but it's redlined. Could you just talk a bit more about that?
Yep. So our community is just south of Montreal, so we're very within an urban area, and our hunting camp is like an hour and 45 minutes north. But our home, we can insure our houses. We do have the ability to insure our houses, our vehicles. And when I found out the premiums, and I also found out that we're in a red zone, I don't know what that means. I think I know what that means, but So our insurance premiums are almost triple that of my neighbor next door for the same size house, same amenities, etc. Like we have water and sewer. There is a hydrant near my house. You know, I'm a firefighter of 18 years. I think I can handle if there was a fire that broke out. So I was trying, you know, so much, and then asking my neighbors, "What do you guys pay for your insurance?" And you know, what are you getting? And then to hear the rates, I thought it was unfair. You know, definitely, like, why are we paying more? But then for some reason, I'm told that it was because it's on a reserve and it's on federal lands. So I'm not sure what that means to you, but I would love for you to take that back and talk about it, because obviously, you know, we just had a home on Christmas Day that caught fire, one of the older homes, and we're built with some really good timber, and it burned hot and right down to the ground. It was a complete loss, and 6 people were in that home, and they did not have insurance. And you know, come to find out that you know, they're on our main, like, they're literally 4 minutes down the road from the fire station. We have a full-time fire department. So for them not to have had insurance, you know, it was mind-boggling. But then that's when the community comes together and tries to help support them. One of the things that our community did is we realized that workmen's compensation insurance is also needed. We have 7 big organizations in our community. They each employ at least 200 individuals, and they started Mohawk self-insurance for workmen's compensation insurance. And MSI covers all employees that are in the community. It started with just the Mohawk employees that worked in the community. And then they made an agreement with Quebec and Quebec CSST and the insurance there. And they agreed to insure everyone that works on the territory, Mohawk or not. So everyone that's in the community, they pay into a premium as well, you know, so for that coverage. And then if there's any injuries or anything, and it also includes, you know, that rehabilitation and everything else after. So that became very successful. I would love if we can have our own Mohawk insurance for even homes and cars, and, you know, to help reduce those rates within our communities. There was, I don't know if this is the point, you know, about with down.
Yeah, well, we can go on to that section. The next section is all about resilience and what can help build resilience. So I think you both have touched on those points. And so it really is that question, what can build resilience in First Nation communities? And I think having a First Nation owned and led insurance company is one model to combat some of the structural racism that we're seeing here. So if you have another example from the States.
Yeah, so I worked down in the States, out of Albuquerque. There is an insurance company down there that's called Amarin Risk, and they are a Native-owned, Native-operated, and they only serve the Native tribal communities and businesses. And they have a very successful insurance model, and they have a whole risk team, which I was part of. But I'm sure when I say risk to you, that's with the financial risk, I'm assuming. And for them, it was about reducing injuries, reducing losses, and reducing even property damages and such. So our risk team, we would go and to the different communities, and we would teach them occupational safety and health training, you know, how their employees can be safe. We would help to do site assessments with them on how to protect their property, similar to FireSmart here in Canada, you know, with wildfires. So how to protect their property, and the more that they took the advice of our risk advisors, the more reduction in their premiums went. So if they didn't do anything, they can still be insured, but obviously at a higher rate. And if they wanted to take the training, if they wanted to put in, all of those protection methods, then they were able to get a reduced rate and, basically know, because they didn't want their employees to get hurt. They didn't want to, anything to break down or have to close down. So there was incentives on both sides for everyone. And it was really, beneficial to work there, because as, when you're going as an insurance employee, it's kind of, I don't know if there's a welcome mat that's out all the time, but certainly when we're talking about how can we work together to make this beneficial for the both of us, obviously it is about reducing losses. So you have the conversation, and here's what we can do.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's an incentives session this afternoon, which I'm looking forward to as well. Another solution that, Tyrone, I think you can speak to is community-based catastrophic or catastrophe insurance and the promise of that. Do you want to explain a bit more about what you hope for here?
And one of the things I raised when I was here last year is asking you to look at us differently and individually, because everybody is so focused on the Lytton wildfire that that entire area was red zoned, right? We have a really proactive small community called Kanaka Bar in there that they're in proximity to Lytton, but the landscape is different. They've made their community resilient. They've made it fire smart. They got metal roofs and stucco sidewalls and all those kind of things. And they got approval to build. They had money in a bank to build 60 houses, but they couldn't break the ground because they didn't have insurance. So as a result, the insurer followed up with them with this catastrophe insurance program that understood, in my view, the locality of Kanaka Bar, the leadership of Kanaka Bar, because they're self-sufficient. They generate their own electricity. They grow their own foods, their meat and their vegetables and whatnot. And the community proudly says that if the nuclear bomb hit, they're fine. They could keep on going. It's the self-sufficiency, and it's the ability for you as insurers to look at innovative ways to support us in our localities. In that case, I'd imagine the premium is pretty low just because of everything they're doing right. But a similar situation, the premiums might be elevated. But get to know us, to allow us to get to know you as to why the premiums are where they are, and or where they're proposed to be is probably a better way of doing that. And the relationships is critical. I was sharing over dinner the other night that my insurance program for my home started with this agent who knew my grandparents. He knew my parents. He knew me. And that was one of the last policies that he got before he retired. But by then he knew my children. So we had that long-term relationship, right? He could sit with us and go through our entire policy. Because if you think about so many of our people coming out of poverty, trying to look after ourselves as opposed to relying on somebody else. I want my own insurance policy. I'm working. I have no idea what that policy is. Sit down with us in a cordial but yet professional fashion. Have an understanding that, yes, we know it costs you this much to build a house, but your coverage is actually this much to allow for A, B, C, D, and whatnot. So that relationships and communications is really important in advancing that. Whether it be, I think it's Guy Carpenter's catastrophe insurance program, or others are doing something differently and innovative. It's really important that you get to know us. And maybe if I extend that just a little bit, Charmaine, it's about improving your cultural competency as companies, as organizations. Too often, I really don't like cultural safety. It's not enough. It's only about me being safe in an environment. I prefer cultural competency, cultural integrity, cultural intelligence. So if your insurers are in the Fraser Valley, you're talking to me as a Stalo person, not an Indigenous person. There's no identity in Indigenous. We're occupying staffing positions within your organizations up at senior levels, so that we're integrating you as a company. We're making you more aware of our communities. We're probably connecting you to more clients because we're a part of you and we know each other. With the First Nations to First Nations, Stalo to Stalo, Métis to Métis, and Inuit to Inuit. So too often a company would hire a Mohawk in the Fraser Valley and say they're Indigenous. That Mohawk person, as much as I respect them, has no idea who we are. So that's not culturally competent, right? Culturally competency speaks to the land that you're operating on, that you're working on, that you're providing policies for. Get to know those folks in a really cordial, in some cases, informal ways. Because when we get together, we tend to have a meal, we share, we do some business, and then we come back together again later on. So we develop different relations than you typically would, right? And we kind of lean on you a little bit because we need you to be flexible, to be nimble, to behave differently to help support us. Not in a dependency fashion at all, but educate us on what insurance is, what insurance availability is, what the premiums are, what payment schedules can we have on it, right? And then the tricky bit there for me, and we're building it into our strategy, is particularly from an insurance perspective, start looking at modifying insurance policies in such a way, and I hear it over and over here, that respond to climate risk differently than provincial and federal programs. Because you've got the ability to control your own identity. Last year I heard some of you were building in Build Back Better aspects of your existing policies. We need to formalize that a little more. What does that look like? For some of my reserves, it's flood, absolutely. But due to climate change, I tell folks, I grew up in a rainforest. It could rain 4 or 5 inches in 24 hours and nobody'd even notice it. Now we notice it because we're not a rainforest anymore. November 2021, we had about 5 inches of rain in 24 hours. If you go back to the 1970s, that wouldn't have done any damage. A couple of houses might have gotten wet, and that's about it, right? So now we have to look at insuring things that never happened to us before. What does that look like? Continue running your models, because your models are better than provincial and federal governments. So bring that to us, and let's have those conversations. And what does it look like over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years from potentially from an infrastructure perspective? Inform us, well, maybe you shouldn't build there. Or maybe you build there, but only under these circumstances and for these uses. And you start a managed retreat over here because you have to move back away from that risk. You can only do so much in terms of risk mitigation in advance, right? And at some point, you just have to retreat right out of that environment because it's not sustainable.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're speaking to the role that each of us can play, and especially the insurance industry and the power that they have in, the levers that they can play in relocation. Yes, please.
I just want to touch on what Chief McNeil had said in regards to if something's on the West Coast, and then getting somebody from the East Coast. And we can all work together. It's a matter of building that relationship, building the understanding, and also that knowledge sharing. I think this is the first time I'm sitting on a stage, talking. And normally if I'm sitting and we're talking, there's a fire in the middle. And, we've all got our tea and we're all having a really good conversation. But it's sitting and going and talking to those potential clients or those communities or those territories and visiting for a while, getting to know them, understanding where is those mutual goals that you have because they're there. And knowing how can we fix it, how can we make it better, and maybe it's not a fixing that has to happen. Maybe it's just a shoring up, of that. So.
Yeah, thank you.
One quick follow-up.
Yeah, please do.
Just a correction. The community-based catastrophe insurance is actually Marsh McLennan. And as a follow-up to Kanakabara, I actually put him in touch. In BC, we First Nations are pretty good at collaborating together. We have one council that looks after all the housing and infrastructure needs for the 204 communities in BC. So I really encouraged Marsh McLennan to engage our housing council to potentially put blanket coverage for all infrastructure on reserve in all of BC. Now I got to check when I get back home. I got to check with the housing council to see if they're able to advance that. Because what I was proposing at that time was a policy like that, a blanket policy for all of our infrastructure on reserve. But if I built my house, a little bit more luxurious, a little bit more expensive, a little more amenities, well, then I could top up that insurance. And I think that would be really manageable to do, right? And because it's so broad, it'll drive down our premiums, or at least it should.
Mm-hmm. Anybody from Marsh and McClellan here to to get the win? No? Yeah? Okay, great. Well, all of you, the business is going to him. Okay, so now we're going to, I wish we had more time, but we want to have time for questions too. So I'll just ask you both for your lightning round takeaways of what you'd like to leave people with. So what can the insurance and disaster response industries do differently, and where do we have more work to do besides copying them and copying Amerind? Maybe I'll start with you, Kellyanne, and give the last word to Tyrone.
Yeah, no, it's coming to the table and, talking with each other as partners. Again, we are all here on Mother Earth, and we're all people, within our communities, our territories and such. So, and we do want to make it easier. How can we be neighbors and partner? And not to forget that within our teachings, we talk about 7 generations. And last week at the climate change, there was a question, can you explain 7 generations and what that philosophy is all about? And that's really difficult to say in 2 minutes, but certainly what we know today was based on teachings from 7 generations back. And what we do today affects 7 generations ahead. And we always have to think 7 generations ahead. So, for example, when, I would ask one of my elders, can I do this, or can we do that? There would be a long pause. And she would really think about that question. And the reason is because she's thinking 7 generations ahead. How will me saying yes right now affect what's going to happen when I'm no longer here, but yet our descendants have Mother Earth now? And, really those key takeaways, including with our youth. And I know it's, difficult sometimes to engage, and it's not all about the doom and gloom and having those doom and gloom conversations, but bringing them to the table to say, here's how we want to help solution moving forward. I know it's a very general statement, but
no, but it's important. I think we say these things, but how do you actually action it in your heart and
right.
in your practice? And it gets back to this morning, that critical thinking skill that somebody was saying was lacking, right? That we need to think comprehensively and ahead to what's coming. Last word to you, please.
I think for me it's about collaboration and partnerships. And I like everything I see here. Your evolving understanding of a risk, your evolving knowledge of where the climate is probably going and trying to get ready to be more responsive for it, the models you're running, the data you're using, we're like-minded in that sense. Our issue is between you and us, our federal and provincial regulations, policies, personalities that get in the way. When we come together as First Nations, I think next month we have a national First Nations gathering on emergency management. It'd be nice to see insurance on one of the plenary agenda items. When I get home, I'm arranging some provincial First Nations sessions on emergency management. I'd like to reach out to whoever you are interested in BC, to come and do a 45-minute or a 60-minute presentation on the modeling that you're doing here, the interest that you hear. And I think together, it goes back to that allyship. We're like-minded here. Let's support each other. Let's come up with some mutual wins here. For me, it's coverage and adequate coverage at a reasonable rate. For you, it might be more policies, more more clients, but it's a common end, right? Because in BC, the Emergency Management Climate Resilience Act is there, but BC hasn't bought into what resilience needs to be. They haven't bought into what Build Back Better needs to be. And I'm sure you could educate them. And I do know some of you insurers do meet with especially provincial government of BC, but I think if we were there together, we could actually force them to get out of that old way of thinking about mitigation first, as opposed to prioritizing understanding of risk and the evolving risks that we're all in, whether it's generational or seasonal. So it's about educating government and forcing their hand to be more responsive for mutual benefit, not only for you as insurers and as us as First Nations, but local governments, British Columbia citizens, everybody benefit from it, right? And it's about the values and principles, what it is that we bring forward about relationships, about communications, thinking ahead. The 7 generations in my language is Tamiyuk. If you go back 7 generations to your great-great-great-great-grandparents, they're called Tamiyuk, all 156 of them, whatever it is by that generation. Going forward 7 generations is Tamiyuk, and I'm in the middle. So I have to take what I've learned, adapt it to this climate change. We haven't seen it reacting as quickly in the past, but then educate my children, my grandchildren, in such ways that they could educate their grandchildren going forward to that 7th generation. So it's never static, right? It's just moving constantly. Let's keep learning. Let's keep developing relationships. Let's keep developing understanding to the common end that we can't control climate. I'll end this way, Charmaine. On one of the late shows the other night, I don't usually watch them, but I was up late, and the guy, the main guy was saying that there's too many people that don't endorse climate change. They don't believe in climate change. Well, if you're one of those people, believe it's a witch's curse is changing the weather, changing the environment, and let's behave that way because we don't have any control of it. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we have time for some questions. If anyone would like to be brave. Yes, Marjorie. Felicia's coming over.
Well, I just want to thank you for all of these deep insights and really just encourage the room to think not only about the Indigenous communities as a place for new markets and new customers, but also a place of wisdom and knowledge. And I mean, I know about the Kanaka Bar. I know Chief Patrick. And I have been working at the intersection of climate change adaptation, community development, and economic development since Hurricane Katrina. And I would say Kanaka Bar, like, I have not seen a community more advanced in its thinking than Kanaka Bar. I was really blown away. And I think that we as an industry, or I would say we, everyone in this room has so much to learn. And so this is not just a pure, charity, come and sell some products to us, please. No, I mean, they're the leaders, in my opinion. So that was my comment. It's not really a question.
Thank you. Well, and with all of the modeling you're talking about, how to integrate different types of knowledges in those models, and there's not just one way, and so we could be creative here. I'd love to see more of that. Any responses?
Maybe just in the sense of the room, we're finding a lot of the resource industries are really advancing ESG and ESG models. Recognizing, supporting, working, collaborating with us. Maybe other industries such as yours should develop a similar model, but that's more relational to you and us in terms of recognizing and respecting where we're coming from to where we want to be, and your role in I won't necessarily say support of that, but the collaboration of that. You can't insure us if you don't know us. I'm not going to buy an insurance policy off of somebody I don't know. I get my car insurance from the same agent year in, year out for the last 30 years because I know them. So it's about long-term sustainability, but to get there, we need to initiate those relationships. You need to improve your cultural competency, advance to cultural integrity, and advance from there to cultural intelligence. And everybody will benefit from that.
And taking a whole of society approach, not just recognizing rights, but empowering your people's rights, right? And what does that look like? You have to talk to the people.
Yep. And if I could just quickly share, in my area, we're packaging it in the Helix Gaka strategy that Charmaine mentioned. In my language, that's get ready together. We're prioritizing regional critical infrastructure. We can price that. It's probably going to be about $5 billion. But our second priority within that is local essential services. Our hospitals, our fire halls, our dairy farms, our poultry farms need access to market, right? Because when people talk about food security, to me it's about food production, getting that food production to market, and us having access to that market. So those are our two main priorities. When we fund that out as a region, we're probably in a $12 to $13 billion range, right? But all of us, all of my communities coming together, the local governments coming together, the whole of society, we're educating the entire agriculture sector in the Fraser Valley. What it is we're doing, I'm confident we'll win them over. So when you have the entire region telling Canada, we need X billions of dollars to do this, it's going to be impossible for Canada to say no. Then it only becomes a timing thing. While they could release $1 billion this year, you heard at NAS earlier, the green funding for the municipalities. It's all got to be aligned, and we're doing that in the strategy. Because when the federal government is throwing out hundreds of millions of dollars, $500 million, casting it out there, it's good money, but in the long term, it's inadequate because there's no long-term collaborative strategy that brings, in our case, First Nations and local governments and provincial governments in line, in a common strategy, common vision, in support of each other. Because we're not going anywhere. So let's do it right. It'll cost so much less to do it right at the beginning as opposed to trying to respond as best you can later. Let's win everybody over to that end.
That would take logic. No. Thank you very much. Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes.
Hi, thanks very much. This has been truly fantastic. My question is about personal insurance, home, auto, and I'll tell you a quick story. In the province of Quebec, what we understand at Aviva is that a few years ago there was an investigation, a journalistic investigation that revealed that applicants in Indigenous communities were not able to even get quotes from many insurers. The AMF, the regulator in Quebec, completed their own investigation and then came to the insurers to say, you need to look at this problem and undertake a bunch of actions, including, and this is where I'm coming to my question, looking at the training that you provide to your underwriters and to your intermediaries, your brokers, your agents, and so on, to ensure that we, as insurers, are doing what we can to eliminate barriers, make personal insurance accessible to First Nations, Indigenous communities. So my question is, could you provide a little advice on how might insurers approach the sort of training to improve access?
Good. That's a great question. And starting with that question is a good way for companies to go. And again, reaching out to whatever region that you're in, to those nations that are there, and asking. Like we've got even professors in our in university right now that's out there speaking and teaching about our communities and our nations. So you can get information to your employees by those communities that you serve. So it's asking them, you mind coming in and maybe speaking for an hour, or can you come once a week when we have our teams together? Those individuals would love to, especially because now you're speaking to that local geography, whereas I wouldn't be able to speak on behalf of Chief McNeil's communities. I can from our communities. So it is really based on the nations that are within your region. Give them a phone call and say, we've got some training coming up. We'd really like to learn about your nation and how can we, teach more. And it is knowledge sharing because, we can learn a lot from you as well. And what message can we get out to our community members that, perhaps you'd like to share as well.
And don't forget to provide food. Right? Always.
For me, it's about transitioning from your current state to a state of cultural intelligence. I'm working with a federal agency right now that's responsible in all jurisdictions in the country. It's got about 600 employees. And we've developed a cultural competency and change management strategy where we're transitioning. Too often a company will hire First Nations, and then anything to do with First Nations across the country, go to that person. Well, they don't know us. They're not us, right? That's not competent, or nor is it competency. So develop a strategy that modifies you structurally. higher First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, right up to senior levels, not just there, but the entire ladder. Have strategies where all of your staff are learning a little bit more about us. Well, when I host a meeting, I host a lot of meetings. If somebody calls me Indigenous, I just about grab them by the cuff of their shirt and walk them out of the room, right? That's insulting to me. It's not competent. So come up with policies that are modifying your behavior as an insurance agent broadly, and then apply it locally and develop those relationships. In my community where I come from, we used to have insurance providers come right into our band office foyer and set up a table. And sometimes there's 2 or 3 of them, different providers, competing with us as we walk into our band administration room, right? Because they know us well enough that they could do that. They're comfortable. They feel safe in our community. There's so much ignorance in Canada right now that for some reason people feel unsafe coming on reserve. I see non-Aboriginal people driving into my gas station in my community that we run, and as soon as they see our artwork and whatnot, they turn around and take off. Just ignorant. They don't know, right? We want to welcome people in those kinds of environments. But if you don't have a certain level of cultural competency, that old indifference, fear, bias, ignorance kicks in. Let's overcome that. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panelists today. Really appreciate this. Thank you.
I also want to thank all 3 of you for such an informative panel. And I would challenge the audience to keep the conversation going. And I'm going to be very specific and call out some names, knowing that I will have others that will be interested in the conversation. But AI6 with your fire modeling, Verisk with your flood modeling, ICLR, product managers from all insurance companies, continue the conversation as we've talked about. And don't let this information just stay in your brain. Move to action.